What is up, guys? Randomodium here. So this is a very important video. This is a video that will help you win a lot more of your Clash games, your Flex 5v5s, your amateur leagues, all of that stuff. This video will help you so much in winning those type of matches. I've come up with a methodology that will allow you to really build out your team compositions and really draft for success. This video builds upon a lot of the things I talked about in my team composition videos. The big thing that you need to know from that video is that there are 5 different types of team compositions. There's attack, catch, protect, siege, and split. Each one of the compositions is strong against 2 compositions and weak against 2 compositions. And really what you're trying to do in draft phase is you're trying to draft towards a winning team composition while also not giving up too much power in the early game. So anyway, let's get into the video. I hope you enjoy it. Now we get into the fun part. This is the really fun part of the stream. So this is your guys' reward for being so attentive earlier on. We're going to get into how you can... We're going to talk briefly about solo queue, but the main focus is going to be Clash. And we're going to talk about how you build your team compositions, especially in Clash. And the big thing that we're going to be talking about for solo queue is basically just like identifying like your win conditions, the enemy win conditions, and then dodging when appropriate. All right, so solo queue. It's really difficult to create team composition in solo queue because you can't control your allies. It's just you. And like maybe they're going to be hovering one champion, then they randomly pick a different champion. It can be near impossible to create a team composition in solo queue. It's a little bit easier when you've got a duo, but yeah. When possible, you want to pick a champion that complements allies' picks or counters the enemy team comp. Like if they're going for really hefty engage, going for somebody who's got good disengage can be very useful. That said, you never want to play a champion that you aren't familiar with, even if they're the perfect pick, right? Like if it looks like a split pusher would be great, but you're not good on the split pushers, you're better on like team fighters. Don't play a split pusher just because you think it's going to be good. It's going to go horribly for you. You always have to play towards your champion pool. Remember that team compositions are win conditions. That's the big thing. Team compositions equal win conditions. So you want to be identifying your team's win conditions, and you want to be identifying the enemy team's win conditions. That's the most important thing when you're in solo queue as far as team compositions are concerned. So you want to consider dodging in solo queue when it's unclear what your win conditions are or what your team composition is. You have a disadvantaged team composition matchup. So, for example, they have a protect and you have an attack, something like that. Poor communication in the lobby. Somebody's already raging. Somebody's already tilted in the pregame lobby. That's a sure sign. You probably want to dodge. You check them out on op.gg or some other site, and they've got a lot of inexperience with the champions. Their first timing Riven or something like that. Negative win rates on the champions. 2 or more losing matchups, or if they're all AD or all AP. So these are all factors that should go into whether or not you dodge in solo queue. Typically, the breakpoint I'm looking for is like 2, maybe 3. But if you're seeing like a bunch of these, you definitely want to be looking to dodge. If there's only one of them, it's usually okay. But when you start getting 2 or more, that's when you need to start being worried. Yeah, pretty much the more you have, the more likely you should dodge. Okay, so... now we're going to get to the favorite part of my stream, Clash. So Clash is confirmed for 2020. The worldwide beta worked. They seem like they were pretty happy with it, and they've confirmed that Clash will be coming, and it will be a staple in the 2020 season. So this will help you win more games in Clash. I'm pretty convinced by it. Our team used it really well during that open worldwide beta, the Hex Tech Cup. We ended up winning 2 out of the 4, and we only had 2 losses. And those losses were us being stupid. I don't think it had anything to do with them outplaying us. I think we threw more than anything. But that's just my personal opinion. But the big thing I want to kind of emphasize with this is that I want feedback. I really want feedback with this stuff. Like, I'm going to share this stuff with you guys, but I want feedback from you guys on what works and what doesn't work. You can hit me up on Discord. You can leave messages. You can hit me up on my email, randomodiumgaming@gmail.com. Let me know what you think works. Let me know what you think doesn't work. I'd love to get feedback. So, what are the steps in order to make a team composition for Clash? First up, you got to rate everybody's champions. I'm not talking just like a few champions. You should have everybody rate every champion. You want to determine next what champions can be flex picks. Then you want to create champion pools for each team composition type based off of the ratings that people gave those champions. After that, you want to discuss with your team, and you want to pick 2 team compositions that are not adjacent to each other that you think you can run. You then want to find picks that can fit into either composition that you also feel comfortable blind picking, preferably. And then in general, you want to delay your support pick as late as possible in the draft. And when possible, you want to draft at least 2 winning matchups. We're going to go over each of these in detail, but this is kind of the general blueprint for how you draft for Clash. Step 1, you want to rate all of your champions. You can do whatever you want, whatever rating system you want to do. I recommend 1 to 10, 10 being your best champions and 1 being your worst. Big thing is you have to be honest, right? You typically will have at least one person on your team that either rates all the champions as a 10 or all the champions as a 1. That's useless if they do that. You have to really be honest. I tend to try to limit how many champions they can put at each rating score, and I usually limit it to like 15 or 20. So you can't have more than 15 or 20 10s, and you can't have more than 15 or 20 1s. You really want to see that distribution. You want to see that how comfortable they really feel with different champions. So limiting how many champions they can put at each rating is usually really useful. And anytime you have a champion that you feel like you could blind pick, that champion should be highly rated. So if your AD carry says like, yeah, I can blind pick Ashe into any matchup, you should definitely be putting Ashe as like a 9 or a 10. So yeah, definitely prioritize those champions that you feel like you could blind pick in multiple situations. So next step, determine which champions can be flex picked. So what you want to do is after everybody has rated every single champion, you want to find champions that 2 more players have rated highly. This is why you have everybody rate every single champion, right? You don't just have them rate the top laners if they're a top laner. You have them rate every single champion. And then you want to determine if that champion can be flexed in 2 or more roles. The big thing is that you don't want to be turned off by off-meta picks, right? Like, off-meta picks can work really well, especially in lower elos. So don't be turned off by those just because it's like a Cho'Gath support or something like that. Like, don't be afraid of that. Flexing a champion into an off-meta role can completely surprise enemy teams. And if you can play that champion effectively in multiple roles, it makes that champion really threatening to other teams. And then you most likely will draw a ban from those teams if you can flex a champion to multiple roles. Like I already mentioned Cho'Gath. Cho'Gath can be played top, jungle, mid, and support if you really want him to. So if you have people who can play Cho'Gath in all those roles, he becomes a huge threat for people because you don't know where he's going. He'll most likely draw a ban, and it allows you to get favorable matchups. So yeah, that's the big thing with the flex picks is that you can basically pick them super early in the draft, and the enemy team has no idea where they're going to go. So basically, if they try to counterpick the Cho'Gath for top lane, and then you flex the Cho'Gath to jungle, then you can pick a top lane matchup that's favorable for your top laner. So that's why flex picks are so powerful, if you can make them work. But you don't want to force them, right? Don't force the flex picks if they're not there. If the person's like, I'm not super comfortable, don't force it. So, next step, you want to create champion pools for each team composition type. The big thing with this is be broad in what champions you think should be included in the champ pool. So you're not looking just for like the most perfect champions for an attack comp. Keep it broad, right? Even if the champion is a little bit more situational in an attack comp, include them in the champion pool. So you'll have like 20 plus champions in your initial champion pool for that team composition. You always want to put the flex picks at the top, right? Put the flex picks at the top, and then maybe prioritize it based off of champion familiarity or how comfortable the person feels with the champion. You always want to prioritize champions that you feel you're more comfortable with over like the perfect champion, right? Champion familiarity is always better than whatever you define perfect as being. Once you create those lists of champion pools for each composition, you want to discuss each composition with your team. and you want to try to rate how strong you think your team is with each of those compositions. So you create champion pools for attack compositions, and then you talk with them and you say, like, well, how good do you think these champion pools really are? Like, how many options do you think we really have with attack compositions? And you compare that to for catch or protect or other types of compositions and rate them. And when possible, you always want to play at least a few games with each comp. So you might look like Siege might look great on paper for you guys, but then you actually get into game and you realize that you can't make Siege work because you guys are just way too bloodthirsty or something like that. I've seen that happen a lot. So always you want to try and put theory into practice, play a few games with each team composition type, figure out which one is going to work for you. One thing that you will, it's kind of your Achilles heel, is that you're often going to be limited by the player with the smallest champion pool. And this doesn't mean you rag on that player or something like that, but just understand that like one of the major limitations of this is how wide everybody's champion pools is. So you often want to take that into account. Like, don't force a player with a smaller champion pool into a team composition that they are not going to be good at. Because you typically, you're only as strong as your weakest link, and if you have somebody on a champion they're not familiar with or not comfortable with, they're not going to perform that well, and they're going to get really frustrated. Okay, so next step, pick 2 compositions that are not adjacent to each other. Here's our standard graphic, and let's say that you've identified that attack is your best composition. Like, you for sure want to go towards attack compositions in your draft. Then you would want your secondary composition to either be protect or you would want it to be siege, because split and catch are adjacent to attack. So you want to have them not adjacent to each other. If you choose attack, your secondary composition would be protect or siege, and I'll explain why. So let's say you go attack siege. Those are your 2 compositions. Let's say the enemy team picks split. Then you would draft towards attack. The enemy team picks siege, you would also draft towards attack because attack is strong into siege. The enemy team drafts protect, you would transition to go more towards a siege composition. If the enemy team drafts catch, you would also go towards a siege composition. The siege is good into both protect and catch. And then if they draft an attack composition, you would also draft an attack composition, and you would basically be 50-50 with them. Compare this to if you went with 2 that were adjacent to each other. So if you go with 2 that are adjacent to each other, let's say attack and catch, if they pick split, then you can either go attack or catch, because both of them are good into split. If they go siege, you can go attack. But if they go protect, you have no composition that you can transition to, because protect is good in both attack and catch. So you have a weakness, you have a flaw, you have a vulnerability if you have 2 compositions that are adjacent to each other. So the whole reason why you pick 2 compositions that are not adjacent to each other is it results in your team having an advantageous matchup against 4 of the compositions, and they'll have an even matchup against 1 composition. If you pick 2 compositions that are adjacent to each other, it's going to result in you being strong against 3 compositions, being even against 1 composition, and being weak against 1 composition. And if you only pick 1 composition for your team, it results in you being strong against 2, even against 1, and weak against 2. So this is talking about, we had a question earlier in the stream talking about like, hey, don't you want to just draft a single composition? This is why you want to try and go for 2 compositions when possible, because you go from having being strong against 2, even against 1, and weak against 2, to being strong against 4 and even against 1 if you have 2 compositions that are not adjacent to each other. So the most common combination I see, it's attack and protect. This is usually like the best for like low elo type stuff. You go attack protect, and this gives you basically like the best team fighting you can possibly go with. So you basically will draft champions that are good in both attack and protect, and then with your last couple picks, you decide whether you go attack or protect based on what they're showing. If you want to go for something a little bit more challenging, you can go for catch split. So catch split is kind of a little bit harder to execute. It's a little bit of a higher elo strategy, but this is also one that's really common in pro play. Is they will go mainly for a catch composition, but there'll be champions that can split push if they're ahead, and if they get ahead, then they transition into either a 1-4 or 1-3-1 split push. This is a really common strategy at pro level. A little bit harder to execute, though. But that's obviously not the only combinations you can have. You can go for attack siege. You can go for protect split. That's a common one, too. You can also go for catch siege. That's another one that you can go for. And which ones you're going to go for is going to depend upon the champion synergies with those team compositions. So, for example, you can see if you've got a mid laner who loves assassins, he's going to want to go for a catch split. That's the combo that you're probably going to want to go for. Or if you've got a juggernaut, right? Juggernauts could be good in protect split. That's like a good combo of team compositions for a juggernaut. So you want to look at this diagram, you want to look at this graphic and see, okay, which champions are going to be good in those combos that I want to go for? Or based off of what the ratings are, you can say, oh, well, this guy rates a lot of assassins really highly, or he rates a lot of juggernauts highly. This will indicate that we want to push our team towards these team composition combinations over others, essentially. Another thing I want to bring up yet again is champions like wardens and battle mages. If you're effective with wardens and battle mages, that means that they can fit into pretty much anything. So if you've got people who are good with those classes that are kind of good into every single composition, that's like really, really nice. That's something that you definitely want to highlight for your teammates. And if you're looking for champions that you want to practice more, it's usually useful to practice those champions that are good across a wide variety of team compositions, if possible. There's obviously some pros and cons to that. The con would be that it's sometimes better to be really specialized in what composition you go for. So, next step, find picks that can fit into either comp that you also feel comfortable blind picking. So this is what we already talked about with those classes. Look at the classes, see what they're good at, see what they're bad at. But you really want to look at the champion level more than anything. What champions are good in what team compositions. So as far as like who you want to blind pick, in general, I think the jungle and bot are usually the best roles to blind pick, because you can avoid a bad matchup in the jungle with proper jungle pathing. So you can basically get some early scouting down. If the person is starting on bot side for their jungle path, and you start on top side, so you basically prevent from meeting them on the jungle paths. And as far as the bot lane matchup, if you get into a bad bot lane matchup, the support pick can often negate a bad bot lane matchup. So support is usually more powerful in laning phase and determining how that matchup goes more than the bot lane. But obviously, like if you pick somebody like a Vayne or something like that, like you could potentially get really screwed. So you have to be careful with certain bot lane picks. The big thing that I've been talking about a lot is that flex picks are super powerful for this. If you intend on using the flex pick, though, you don't want to pick the other role that the champion can be flexed into, right? So if you can flex a champion into top and jungle, obviously you don't want to pick your jungler or your top laner, right? You want to like hold on to those picks and just leave the flex picks. They don't know where it's going, essentially. Okay, so in general, you want to delay your support pick as long as you can. And the reason for this is that support can wildly swing a composition from one direction to another. So support position has the most versatility when it comes to the team composition. I would say like top lane is the most diverse as far as the champion classes that can be played. But as far as like team composition diversity, it's the support role that has the most diversity. So you're talking like compare a Leona to a Janna, or a Taric to a Vel'Koz, right? There's just this massive range that the support role has. And I feel like support is incredibly underrated when it comes to team composition, strategy, things like that. So you can pick your support early, but understand that you are giving something up by going for your support pick early. The other reason why I love delaying the support pick is that there are plenty of off-meta picks that can be played as a support, right? You've got Zac, Swain, Shaco, Ash, Misfortune, Teemo, etc. There's tons of picks that can be flexed into support if you've got somebody who's good with those champions. So support is a great place that you can exercise those flex picks. There's a downside to this, of course. So if your support has a very limited champion pool, then delaying the support pick, the strength of it diminishes. And in general, if your support only has a few champions that can play, you do want to pick your support pick earlier rather than later, right? You do want to, if you have somebody who's got a really wide champion pool, you can usually afford to let them pick later in the draft because there's a less likelihood that they're going to get banned out, essentially. Okay, and the last step, when possible, you want to draft 2 winning matchups. So a matchup meaning top, jungle, mid, or bot. I include support with the bot lane in general. You want to have 2. You want to have 2 that you feel like are winning. And the reason for that is team compositions, they don't matter in the early game. They really don't get their strength until the mid and late game. The easiest way to lose when you have a team compositional advantage is to get destroyed in laning phase. Like if you are way down in gold in laning phase, that's the easiest way to lose if you have a team composition advantage. You need to have winning or at least even matchups to ensure that you can enter the mid game with not too much of a deficit. You don't have to have a gold advantage. You're just looking to stop the bleeding and prevent having a massive gold deficit going into the mid game. If you mess up and you don't have that many winning matchups, you only have 1 winning matchup or no winning matchups, you have to play super passive. And you need to avoid fighting at all costs in the early game. You need to give up objectives if they go for like an early Drake or something like that. Conversely, if you don't have the team composition advantage, if they pull out something at the last second and they surprise you, or you just can't match them because you don't have the champion diversity, you should be drafting for a strong early game. Team composition advantages don't matter in the early game, so if you don't have the team compositional advantage, you want to fight early as often as possible. You want to focus on snowballing a lead, you want to focus on early game champions, and you basically go all in on the early game strategy. So yeah, that's basically what you want to do if you don't have a team composition advantage. Play for early game. Like play super aggro, draft early game champions, look for that early game of victory. That's it. That is how you draft for Clash compositions. All right, guys, that is the video. If you have any questions on the methodology that I discussed in this video, please leave a comment below or hit me up on Discord. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I definitely want to get your guys' feedback on how this methodology worked for you. If there's anything that went good, bad, ugly, I want to know. So please let me know, leave comments, talk to me on Discord, hit me up on Gmail. My Gmail is randomoniumgaming@gmail.com. Any of those ways are great. I'd love to watch some VODs of you guys playing or discuss anything else relating to team compositions or drafting. Anyway, I hope you guys have a fantastic day. This is Randomonium signing off.